John Harbaugh got roasted, and Lamar Jackson was compared to some legendary quarterbacks as the Baltimore Ravens prepare for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Week 7. We talk about that and so much more coming up on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Allstriker of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, as always, and making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available for you all podcasting platforms, that includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, you can follow along with us and subscribe over there for 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. However you decide to watch or listen, it's the same show, both audio and video form. Today's crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Going to be diving into the Ravens and Buccaneers matchup with James Yarcho of Locked On Bucs for crossover Thursday. But first, we have a couple of Ravens notes to talk about. The first of which, John Harbaugh got roasted by Mad Dog over on ESPN, where Tony Romo, during the CBS broadcast of Ravens Commanders, called John Harbaugh a top 10 coach of all time. And Mad Dog went off. He was like, Harbaugh must have took him out to dinner. I could not believe it. Like, all this stuff was listing off coaches, this, that, and the other. And he was not happy about that notion. And Mad Dog was saying, oh, you remember when Jeff Saturday was the coach of the Colts? Jeff Saturday was different than, everything. Oh, he's the guy that was better than Harbaugh. And Chan Gailey better than Harbaugh, right? So all of this was, some of it was in jest, obviously. But, the conversation about Harbaugh, he was roasted for that, kind of like caught a stray, I guess. But look, in my opinion, I don't think Harbaugh right now at this point is a first, top 10 coach guy. Like, I don't think Harbaugh's a top 10 coach right now. He has 164 wins in his career. He has the 19th most wins among all coaches. He's going to go down as one of the best coaches in the game. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about Harbaugh and, his game management over the years, this, that, and the other. He's won a Super Bowl. By the end of the season, he'll probably be closer to top 10 in wins. But there are other guys, guys that have multiple Super Bowls. I think to catapult Harbaugh into that category, he would probably have to win at least one more Super Bowl, get the top 10 in wins, and, maybe a thing or two that I can't think about right now. But Mad Dog was like going in on this whole thing. So again, obviously the Jeff Saturday, Chan Gailey stuff, like, okay, come on. That's obviously he was joking with that. At least I hope so. It'd be kind of concerning if he wasn't. But, he listed off a bunch of other coaches. And Harbaugh, look, top 20, yeah, he's 19th in wins, has a Super Bowl. I think he's probably in that conversation right now. I know that the recency stuff with Harbaugh, and again, when I talk about the game management, it's like, okay, I know the opinion for some people has soured on him. But as I've consistently said, his Ravens tenure, look, he's been there since 2008. He's been there for a super long time. He's had the regular season consistent success. And the playoff success early was really, really good. Lately, hasn't been as good. But early on, he did have that track record. So, again, the body of work for John Harbaugh overall is obviously very good. And if, whenever, if ever, the Ravens move on, obviously he'd probably get another head coaching job. I'm pretty sure about that. And then Lamar Jackson ended up being compared to some legendary quarterbacks by former Washington tight end Logan Paulson. Obviously, the Ravens and Commanders matched up last week. And during one of the recap episodes of the Take Command show, 106.7 The Fan, Logan Paulson was talking about Lamar Jackson getting his team into consistently the right look. He compared that ability to that of Tom Brady, that of Peyton Manning, and he said, quote, I didn't think he had that kind of ability at the line of scrimmage. He was kind of shocked by it. And more of the full quote, he said, quote, it was like a cheat code, his ability to identify the coverages. We were talking about it after the game. If Joe Witt Jr., the defensive coordinator for the Commanders, could have done more potentially to disguise the coverages, make it a little harder on Lamar. And he said the super impressive, a lot of the big plays came from his communication and mastery of that offense. Those plays were backbreaking. Look, Lamar's been doing stuff like this for years. This is not a revolutionary thing like, oh, wow, this season, all of a sudden, Lamar's good at this stuff. No, Lamar Jackson's a very smart person, a very smart football player. He understands the game. But the thing is, in Greg Roman's offense, he did not have that freedom, right? We talked about that forever when Greg Roman was in Baltimore, and even last offseason when Monken was giving him the control, right? There is a partnership between Todd Monken and Lamar Jackson, where this is more of Lamar Jackson's offense than it ever was under Greg Roman. So he has the ability to check out a certain plays. Obviously, he's not necessarily throwing the ball up to Mark Andrews anymore. He's been progressing through his reads, and that's something that he's been doing consistently and getting better at over the course of his career. He's not where he is now. He was not there early in his career. He did a lot of good things early in his career. We have consistently seen the progression of Lamar as a football player, as a runner, as a passer, as a quarterback. And so that stuff is all just in the growth process. But the reason we're seeing Lamar in that aspect being put on more full display is because his offensive coordinator is giving him more freedom, which his old offensive coordinator did not. So Lamar's always been good at doing that. He's always seen defenses. He's always been able to do that. And we've seen it for years. But this past year and a half under Todd Monken, that ability has been put much more on display because Monken has, again, given him the keys to the offense. But with all that being said, we have lots to dive into. James Yarcho of Locked On Bucs previewing this Ravens and Buccaneers Monday night matchup. So let's get into it now.
Let's start with the Baltimore Ravens, Kevin, because the Ravens might just be the hottest team in the NFL right now. They're coming into Tampa on a 4-game win streak. Not going to lie, living close to Cincinnati, I laughed really, really hard over that overtime win over the Bengals, but they have the top rushing attack in the NFL. Zay Flowers looks like he's really starting to find his groove, and that's helpful for the Ravens, not so much those of us that have Mark Andrews in fantasy football. But what's the biggest story surrounding the offense with the Baltimore Ravens coming into week 7?
Yeah, there are certainly multiple, James, but I think if I had to pick one, it's the duo of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and how well those two have been able to work together. Obviously, both those guys in MVP conversations. There is a world where, we continue on and Lamar wins his 3rd MVP and Derrick Henry wins Offensive Player of the Year. They've been that good this season. Derrick Henry, that, you're on FanDuel anytime touchdown, like that is just a lock every single week, it seems like. Lamar. And actually, one of the things, they played the Commanders last week. They won 30-23. And former Commanders tight end Logan Paulson ended up talking about Lamar. Obviously, we know about his athletic ability, his ability with his arm and with his legs. But something that he said was, Lamar's getting to the line and he's checking out of these certain plays and looking at these looks and going through his progressions. And, Logan Paulson said, I didn't think he had that kind of ability at the line of scrimmage, and those plays are back-breaking. And this is something that Lamar's been doing for years. But the difference is that in Greg Roman's offense, he didn't necessarily have that control. Todd Monken has come in. This is the 2nd season. Obviously, Tampa fans are very familiar with Todd Monken, and he has opened up this offense for Lamar, given him that control. So something Lamar's been doing for years. He's been getting that control back over these last 2, and he's been able to go through progressions, audible at the line, checking from runs to pass. Look, he's a very smart person, very smart football player, and he's using that to his ability, and he has been his entire career with that added freedom in this offense and kind of a tandem, I guess, instead of just Greg Roman running the show. It has opened up everything for this unit. Zay Flowers is playing great. Rashad Bateman is playing great. But the big thing, James, is that in years past, and you talked about Mark Andrews, it's just chuck that thing up. Mark Andrews is down there somewhere. Let's just see what happens. Lamar's spreading the ball around consistently this season, and he's using every weapon in that arsenal that the Ravens have given him, and is part of the many reasons why he is so dominant this season. Number 1 in total yards, top 5, top 7 in so many passing categories, not to mention his rushing ability. He has been incredible this season. And right now, I'd say, him and Baker are some of the top guys in that MVP conversation right now. So maybe a little battle, but in the battle between the Ravens and Bucs this week.
Yeah, I saw NFL on Fox's Carmen Vitale shared something for her podcast that she was doing, and they did one of those side-by-side player A versus player B comparisons. And player A, she goes, you're not going to sneak Baker Mayfield past me. And then player B was Lamar Jackson, and it was pretty impressive how similar they were in terms of completion percentage. I think Baker was up by like 2.5%. Total yards, Lamar had him by like 300. Touchdowns, Baker was up by a couple. Interceptions, Lamar had a few fewer. So we're in for a really entertaining game, no doubt about it. And you mentioned Derrick Henry also being in that MVP conversation. I wish I could agree with you because he should be, but we all know that the MVP has turned into whoever is the quarterback of the best team essentially gets the award. It's like the NFL's Heisman. So Derrick Henry, I think, locked and loaded offensive player of the year, should be an MVP candidate, but we all know that it's the quarterback award. But he's running like he's 23 years old again. It's really, really impressive. The level that he's taken that Baltimore offense to, that was already a good offense to begin with, but now things have really opened up for them. But let's flip it over and talk about how the run defense in Baltimore has been one of the best in the league. The passing defense struggling a little bit early in the season. Kevin, what's the top story for that defense coming into Tampa here on Monday Night Football?
It definitely is the secondary and the pass defense. I mean, the run defense you mentioned, it's been great, number one in so many different categories. And Baltimore's domination on the ground, I mean, they're out rushing teams by a wide margin, and that's because their run offense is so good and their run defense doesn't really allow anything either. But in the secondary, there's concern. And it's weird because they have talent back there. Like Marlon Humphrey is having a pretty strong season this year. You have guys like Kyle Hamilton, who's that Swiss Army knife in that defense. Brandon Stevens, while, you're looking at him and some of the stats might not be there, other stats say he's having a great year and he's in a contract year. He could be getting big money from a team this offseason. But Marcus Williams, their big money acquisition a couple of years ago, has fallen off a cliff this year. I believe he's the worst graded safety in the league this year. He's getting frozen, turned around. Guys are coming into his zone with no punishment. It's been a pretty steep fall. And part of this also has to do with play calling and adjustment to a first-time defensive coordinator. Zach Orr has called 6 games. This will be his 7th against Tampa on Monday night. And while he played for 3 years with the Ravens, there was always going to be this learning curve, especially when the Ravens have gone through the gauntlet that they have. First test ever as a coordinator was Patrick Mahomes in week 1, and Andy Reid in that historic offense that they've had for years. And even though that offense hasn't really been the Kansas City offense this year, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid know how to punish them, and experienced coordinators. We've seen that. Then you have guys like Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow. You have Jaden Daniels, who's playing incredible football. They're just going quarterback after quarterback after quarterback. And obviously it does not get any easier with Baker Mayfield in this passing offense Tampa has in week 7. But the other big thing is that, and I've talked about it really all year, James, on Locked On Ravens, is the fact that if there is a number 1 star receiver, you have to stop that guy. Let somebody else beat you. And they didn't really do it with Terry McLaurin last week. I mean, yardage-wise, yes, but he had 2 big touchdowns in that game. Jamar Chase went for almost 200 on this Ravens defense in week 5. They were able to stifle CeeDee Lamb. I thought that was actually their one good performance against a star wide receiver, but they're letting guys who can beat them. Devontae Adams almost single-handedly beat them, besides the Ravens beating themselves in that game in week 2. So now you have 2 studs. You have Mike Evans and you have Chris Godwin, and those are guys you have to account for. And it's a little difficult, or a little more difficult, when it's not just one guy. It's not like you can just throw the farm at Mike Evans. Well, Chris Godwin's going to beat up on you if you do that, and vice versa if you throw it all at Chris Godwin. So the big storyline in Baltimore is the pass defense can't continue doing what they're doing because the passing offense is so good. The rushing offense is so good. The rushing defense is so good. It's just kind of like that final infinity stone of like, all right, can that pass defense get it going? If so, man, this is going to be a very tough team to beat for anybody.
Well, and it's honestly kind of scary to think about. Bucs fans know all too well, you have a first-time play caller at the coordinator spot. That's what they had in Dave Canales last year. And things got a little rocky there for a little bit. They started off hot, lost a ton of games in a row, were able to battle back and make the playoffs. But late in that season, Dave Canales kind of found that rhythm and found that groove. So if Baltimore has the same luck on the defensive side of the ball to really have a defense that plays as well as their offense, that is terrifying for any team in the AFC that might have to run into them in the postseason. But you're 100% right. This isn't just, it's not an offense with just one guy. Chris Godwin is, basically the league's top receiver in most categories. And then he and Evans are tied for the most touchdown receptions in the NFL through the first 6 weeks. So it's going to be a pretty big test. We are going to talk about the Buccaneers side of it as they look to get a win in front of their fans on what is sure to be an emotional night. That is coming up next on this crossover Thursday episodes of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
First, the show is brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Lamar Jackson rookie card, maybe Derrick Henry rookie card, that just isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. But thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of the retail price. Every card that can be listed, especially last week's Arena Club slab pack drop, it's a hit. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. And the Arena Club slab packs are amazing. The experience is awesome. The display of available cards is great. The hit rates are out of this world. The grading is exquisite, and so much more. Much better than those mystery packs you might purchase. Arena Club slab packs revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent, with a full grade rationale provided and explanation of how your card was scored. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL. Code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your first purchase. And the show is brought to you by Game Time. I'm a big basketball guy, big Denver Nuggets guy, and the hype and atmosphere of watching basketball live is unmatched. You got celebrity sightings, the sound from the court, and the feel of the crowd. And for me, I remember obviously being here in Baltimore, going down to DC, watching the Nuggets play down there. And I'm looking forward to hopefully doing that again this season. Game Time has a new feature now called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. And it's not just sports. Game Time has tickets for all events, concert shows. And again, is not just sports. Game Time Picks photos out the front to show you all the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So for this Ravens and Bucs game, if you want to try to find seats for that, Game Time is the place to go to. They have super deals and other tiers of deals that can help you out. And they have so many great features on their app, like Game Time Picks, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Game Time ticket coverage, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LockedOnNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LockedOnNFL, spelled LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs, Locked On Ravens your first listen review every single day. The new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. Join the madman Tyler Rowland, who kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then swing by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Kevin, let's go ahead and flip things around to the home team, talking about a game that will be played in front of these fans for the first time since Hurricane Milton. That's going to be an emotional night for the Buccaneers as well as their fans. But when you take a look at what's been going on with the offense, you talked about Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but they finally had an explosion in the run game. Can they keep it going against this defense? As of this recording, we have no word on whether or not Rachaad White is going to be available for this game. My guess, way too early prediction, he's going to play. And that makes the Bucs running back situation a little bit murky. Sean Tucker coming off 136-yard performance on the ground, nearly 200 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Bucky Irving has been running the ball much more effectively. Rachaad has struggled, but he struggled early last season before he got into a rhythm and started being really, really effective, nearly 1,000 yards on the season. So the question is, can they keep this run game going? And how are they going to utilize this 3-headed monster? And if the Bucs are going to win this one, they have to run the ball. They have to control the clock, keep Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson on the sideline. To me, you got to utilize Rachaad and Bucky early in the game and then start using Sean Tucker in those short yardage, goal line, and then late in games. Defenses are going to get tired. Rachaad and Bucky don't have the power and the strength that Sean Tucker does. So you start bruising some of those defenders with Tucker, then you can bring Rachaad or Bucky back in, hit him with some elusiveness, hit him with some quickness, and maybe do better than most teams do against the Ravens run D.
I'm glad you said what you said earlier, James, in that, because I think, to me, one of the best ways to stop this Ravens offense, you said it, is to put the offense out there yourself and run plays for 9-10 minutes and whatever it is, control the clock, because we know that this Ravens offense is so efficient. But for the Ravens defense in particular, I mean, again, top rush defense in the league, giving up just 3 yards per carry. And part of that is because of the guys they have up front. Their front four has played phenomenal this season, especially when stopping the run. Travis Jones, a third-year player out of UConn who fell to the Ravens in the 3rd round a couple of years ago, has been just an absolute menace, pushing over offensive linemen, using his strength. And he has been, in my opinion, Baltimore's best run defender this year. Then you also have guys like Nnamdi Madubuike, who you have to worry about. Michael Pierce, who is a force to be reckoned with in there. And their pass rush is also something, or at least their outside linebackers, they can both rush the passer and also set an edge for you. Odafe Owe is a physical outside linebacker. And so you have this, whether you want to call it a 3-headed monster out there in Tampa right now, or just a confusing situation. Either way, you got a lot of talented running backs. And so for the Ravens, any week, it's about making the opposing offense one-dimensional. And so if Tampa Bay is able to set themselves up in second and short, because second and long they're just drive killers. You know, if you get stuffed for no gain or 1 yard on first down, you put yourself in a 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9, that just changes up how you have to play that to the sticks. And then if you get stopped in an incompletion on 2nd down, then you're all of a sudden in 3rd and 10, 3rd and 9, and that just, it ruins everything. So one of the keys for Tampa, and we'll get to this in a little bit, is to be able to establish yourself early against this Ravens run defense, because again, that's where the Ravens bread and butter has been. And so if the Ravens secondary continues to struggle and you can take advantage of their strength, if Tampa does that, that could make it a very difficult game defensively for the Ravens.
Yeah, and although the Bucs have had, pretty decent success on those 2nd and longs, 3rd and longs, thanks to Chris Godwin, you keep putting yourself in those positions and it will bite you in the butt. We've seen that happen as well. So while they're doing well, that's not a situation that you want to put yourself in against those pass rushers, against this Baltimore defense. Then when it doesn't work, you got to punt the ball away, and now all of a sudden you're digging yourself a hole that's going to be really, really hard to climb out of. Defensively for the Buccaneers, the biggest question is which defense is going to show up. In the past, they've had a lot of success against Derrick Henry, but that was when he had Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis at quarterback. That's not the case anymore. The Bucs have to actually worry about who is under center this time when they face them. And they're uncharacteristically outside the top 10 in run defense this year. Now they do finally have Kalijah Cansey and Antoine Winfield Jr. back, but is this going to be the defense that allowed over 500 passing yards to Kirk Cousins and Kyle Pitts to have his best game in years? Or is it going to be the defense that shut out the Saints second half with 3 sacks and 2 interceptions? Containing Lamar first and foremost is pivotal, but the primary focus has to be keeping Derrick Henry from taking over this football game. The defense didn't let Alvin Kamara go anywhere in the second half. They shut down Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler with the Commanders. They shut down Saquon Barkley, who at that time was, the top running back in the NFL, but they also let Jahmyr Gibbs, get things going on the ground game. Jaden Daniels, even Bo Nix to a certain extent, those guys really started to run over him. So Todd Bowles has to have his game plan ready, and not the kind of game plan he had against Atlanta where the entire team couldn't stop a nosebleed, more like that game plan the second half against the New Orleans Saints. When they made some adjustments, they figured out some of the things that Rattler was trying to do or was already doing and completely shut it down.
And one of the things that makes this Baltimore offense so dangerous is that duo and the ability to work play action off of that. We saw for the Ravens last week against the Commanders, Washington sold out everything to try to stop that run game. And while they admittedly had a little bit more success, and by that, Derrick Henry still went for 132 yards. But regardless, what happened was the Ravens said, that's fine if you're going to sell out and put these guys in the box. Our receivers are going one-on-one with your secondary. And that's money for the Ravens in that situation, because Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, those are guys who can win that. So Tampa's secondary, if Tampa decides to sell out, put guys in the box, try to neutralize that Ravens rushing attack, their corners are going to have to hold up in one-on-one coverage and make sure that guys like Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, etc., do not beat them. And plus, we have the threat of the Mark Andrews, who, again, even if he hasn't been producing the way that a lot of people have been accustomed to over the course of his career, his presence is still, the word that we use here in Baltimore is a lot of these players have gravity. Like, you have to move with Lamar Jackson. You have to move with Derrick Henry. If you leave Mark one-on-one, even though it's not been a strong start, he still is probably going to be able to make your defense pay. So there's so many ways that this goes. Tampa's secondary is going to have to be key in that, as well as effectively stopping Lamar and Derrick Henry. And kind of like what we talked about for the Tampa side of things, if you want to win, you got to force the Ravens into 2nd and 9s, into 3rd and 8s, and make them do that. And even so, Lamar's been slinging the ball so well, much like Baker has, that it sometimes won't even matter in those situations. But priority number one has to be stopping the Ravens ground game if you are the Buccaneers, for sure.
All right. 3 things that each team needs to do in order to get a primetime win on Monday night. That is coming up next on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs.
First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So to get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You're started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So for this Ravens and Buccaneers game, Monday Night Football, the Ravens open up as 3.5-point road favorites. So if you like the Ravens on the favorite side, the Bucs on the underdog side, be sure to choose your side over on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com.
Wrapping things up here on a crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs. And this crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Kevin, we have talked a lot about what the Bucs have to offer, what the Ravens have to offer, some of the shortcomings. What are the 3 things that Baltimore needs to do on Monday night in order to come away with their 5th straight win and really start to put a stranglehold on the AFC as a whole?
Yeah, it's been quite the turnaround for Baltimore since that 0-2 start. But I think the first thing that the Ravens have to do in this game, I would love it if they were to get off to a fast start against this Tampa team. Like you said, I expect a lot of points in this game both ways. And if the Ravens can get out to a 10-0, 14-3, let's just say something along those lines type of lead, that will let them play defense more freely. Maybe Tampa will have to abandon the run game at that point. We'll see, how that goes for them. But for the Ravens, they have proven that they can, playing with a lead in the 4th quarter gets a little bit dicey for them, at least over the course of this season. But at least for the first 3 quarters, they play with a lead pretty well. And then we've also seen, for example, that game against Cincinnati and even the game against Kansas City where they had to come from behind and were just a toe away from beating or tying Kansas City in that game. They've been able to come back in some of these games, but it does not hurt to have a fast start. And I think you can establish momentum in that game. And sometimes when you do that, a la what happened against Buffalo for Baltimore in week 4, Derrick Henry opens that up with an 87-yard touchdown. Sometimes you just don't look back after you were able to do that. I also think for the Ravens defensively, kind of like what we talked about in the first couple segments, Baltimore has to be able to shut down or at least slow down Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I don't think you're going to completely shut both guys down. They're going to get something somewhere with those guys. They're too talented not to. But if those guys are beating you over and over again, it opens up everything for Tampa Bay. I think they'll be able to run the football more effectively. Other targets will be able to get more because then you have to start shadowing guys over to those 2 players. So just like we've seen for the Ravens this season, star receivers will get theirs in some way, shape, or form. But can you limit it enough to where it doesn't feel as big of a threat and you feel comfortable maybe with some one-on-one coverages, maybe with just a little shadow here and there? If you have to start doubling guys or moving guys into that zone, Tampa could be able to feast off of that, especially with how Baker is slinging this football around. And then finally, just mistake-free football. One of the things that a lot of people have echoed this year in Baltimore is the Ravens' biggest opponent is themselves. They've beaten themselves in multiple times, almost lost games because of penalties or poor decision-making. John Harbaugh has been under fire a couple of times. And actually, I don't know if you saw James Mad Dog went on ESPN yesterday and was said, Tony Romo called him a top 10 coach on the CBS broadcast of all time. And Mad Dog was like, Harbaugh must have taken Romo out for dinner. Like that's ridiculous. Like all this stuff. He said Jeff Saturday was a better coach and was just going off on that. But Harbaugh's been awesome during his time in Baltimore. The issue with him over the last 5 or so years has been some of that decision making and some of the game awareness, where we know Harbaugh's record, but it was a pretty clean game from John Harbaugh in week 6, where the first 5 weeks there was always something to talk about. If he can put together another clean game, no poor decisions, and that's all the coaching staff, not just Harbaugh, but coaching staff, players. Everybody plays a clean game. I think that gives the Ravens the best shot to win because you are not just hurting yourself over and over in those situations.
Yeah, and on the Bucs side of things, look, they got to clog up those run lanes. They got to expose the secondary. And for the love of all things holy, protect Baker Mayfield. Look, clogging up the run lanes, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, Logan Hall, Levante David, KJ Britt, those guys have to be on top of things in this one. They have to stop Derrick Henry immediately before he gets to the second level. If Henry gets past that defensive line with a head of steam, those Bucs defensive backs are going to have a really bad night. Henry is going to bounce off of them like a grown man playing football against a peewee team. The Bucs defensive line is very different when they had Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey together. That became evident down the stretch last week against the New Orleans Saints, but it's a lot easier said than done to stop someone like Henry, but the Bucs absolutely cannot afford to let him dictate this game. As far as exposing the secondary, you talked about it. I've talked about it. You know, it's no secret that the Ravens secondary outside of Marlon Humphrey this season has struggled a little bit. And that's real handy for a Bucs team that has Mike Evans that can get huge chunks in a hurry on the outside. Humphrey is going to have his hands full if he's lining up with Chris Godwin out of the slot, you know, the league's leader in receptions, touchdowns, yards after catch, you know, but he might be the only slot corner on the Buccaneers schedule that can actually slow Godwin down. So the issue there is if he's going to slow Godwin down, now Jalen McMillan has to step up. Sterling Shepard has to step up. Mike Evans has to be the first ballot Hall of Famer that he is and expose some of those weaknesses in the secondary in order to make sure that this Bucs offense can stay on the field, extend drives that end in scores, really chew up a lot of clock and be able to control things. And then, of course, speaking of Baker Mayfield, you have to keep him upright and so that he can find those guys down the field. There are some really good pass rushers on the Ravens defense, and the Bucs' entire starting offensive line has not been together since week 1 against the Commanders. Rookie center Graham Barton was out last week with a hamstring issue. Again, we don't know if he's going to be available for this one. Hopefully he is, but Robert Hainsey played really well in his absence. But they have to protect Baker, allow those wide receivers to get through their routes and you know, create those mismatches, allow that stuff to develop so that Baker can keep doing what he's done all year. If Mayfield has to start bailing and taking off to run, he does a pretty good job of sliding. But you and I both know the competitor that Baker is, and a couple of times he's going to lower that shoulder and he's going to try to fight for those extra yards. Don't even let him do it. Give him the clean pocket to work with. Let him pick apart a sometimes susceptible Ravens secondary. But Kevin, we're in for an exciting one, man. This is going to be a really fun game to watch. I'm glad it's in prime time. I'm glad these two teams are going to be under the big spotlight, especially with the way that Lamar and Baker have been playing this year.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I mean, and Lamar and Baker obviously have a history going back to both being drafted. Baker first overall, Lamar last pick of the first round in 2018. Both the guys have so much respect for each other. There are so many cool stories and you know everything. And then Baker honestly had a couple of fiery lines that people here in Baltimore still reference from back in the day. But it's cool to see those two every time they step on the field together. And while they're not going to be facing off one-on-one, you know, Baker's not going to be trying to tackle Lamar out there. The quarterback
that would be ugly.
Yeah, I don't know how that would go. I think I'd probably pick the Ravens if that were the case, but going to be a good game regardless.
Yeah, 100%. And just so that your listeners and viewers know, Baker's a little bit different of a guy than he was back in those Browns days. So maybe don't hold it against him too much, things that he said back then, but you know, I digress.
James is great. Really appreciate him giving all that Buccaneers insight. Should be an awesome game between Baltimore and Tampa Bay under the lights in prime time. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Be sure to like and subscribe in video form, follow along in audio form 4 or 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. All the support is so appreciated. Thank you to all the everydayers out there, first-time listeners, somewhere in the middle listeners. It all means so much to me, whether you are a video watcher or an audio form listener. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be routing out the weekday week with more Ravens coverage. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back in tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.